sound good?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, good. And I'm not getting feedback, so that'll be fine. And it's 10:30, so I think I'll get started now. Welcome to Saturday Matters. And to my talk today, I want to introduce perhaps a little known aspect of American political history and political philosophy and thought. I'm back to New York in the mid to late 1800s in the reign of Tammany Hall, which you've probably heard of. And you've also heard of machine politics probably. We're going to go into that a little bit more. The famous leader of Tammany Hall was known as Boss Tweed. He swung a lot of influence in New York in his time. It was a Democratic Party political machine. He was born in 1823 in Manhattan, and he died in 1878 in the Ludlow Street jail. He did have his downfall. The era of politics here is government jobs were allocated by the patronage system, also known as the spoils system. The political practice whereby the victorious political party gets to throw out everybody else if it was a different party and replace it and give out jobs in the government as a reward for helping to win the election. And it created very loyal political, what they're called machines, because if your livelihood is depending on who gets elected next time around, then you will do your very best to make sure that that candidate wins. And then, of course, once a political party is in power, they have an enormous amount of influence over who the government does business with, contracts and so forth, and that's another source of doling out jobs to people in exchange for their political support. Now, there's some revision of thinking now about they were corrupt, of course, and undemocratic because they, there's a lot of paranoia in certain quarters about election fraud nowadays, which is extremely rare, but it was almost a standard practice then. One of the ways that political machines get their power is they took charge of the vote counting process. But there were some benefits to the people who supported them. They were responsive. They got jobs and other benefits for the people in that political party. They helped the immigrants and the poor, and there were many immigrants arriving in New York at this time. They helped them become naturalized citizens and therefore voters. The city at the time didn't have very many basic services. It was pretty primitive, but the Tweed Ring or Tammany Hall provided a lot of services for the price of a vote, or if you were very enterprising, several votes. You've heard the phrase vote early and vote often. That was a technique. They sent their people early to the polls to vote for people who hadn't bothered to show up yet. Tweed was making sure these immigrants who arrived with just nothing, they got them jobs, they found them places to live, they made sure that they had food and medical care, they got coal for them in the middle of winter so that they could heat their luxurious apartments. They contributed generously to the churches and synagogues and the Catholic schools and hospitals, orphanages, and other charities. When dilapidated tenement buildings burned down, which was frequent at the time, if you had to set something on fire to get heat or to cook, in buildings not terribly well constructed, there often were fires. So sometimes the Tammany people arrived right along with the fire trucks, making sure that the family had enough food, if they found them a place to stay, if their living quarters were destroyed, clothes, and so forth. And so the immigrants of New York were grateful. They believed, in a sense, the Tweed Ring was creating a healthier society. This immigration chart shows what happened. The blue section is immigration from Ireland to the United States, and you say that great big peak is in the period that runs from 1841 to 1850, and then 1851 to 1880, coinciding with the Irish potato famine, where thousands of Irish arrived in New York. Now, one of Tammany's big supporters, he actually was in the declining years of Tammany after, this was after Boss Tweed's death, and a lot of Tammany activities had been broken up. It was, of course, corrupt. This is George Washington Plunkett's podium. He used to appear almost every day at the shoe shine stand in the New York courthouse. He had whenever he had an audience, he would speak and elucidate the philosophy of Tammany Hall. Plunkett was born in poverty. He had only 3 years of formal schooling, but he died rich. He served on many New York State municipal boards, commissions, and he was elected to the New York State Assembly, 1 term, and 3 terms in the New York State Senate. There was a newspaper man called William Riordan who worked for the New York Evening Post. He recorded many of Plunkett's discourses, and they were published in the Saturday Evening Post and other periodicals, eventually then collected into a book published in 1905 called Plunkett of Tammany Hall. I am going to read 3 of his most famous sections of 3 of his most famous speeches, or not, they weren't really speeches, they were much more informal than that. This is the motto of George Washington Plunkett: I seen my opportunities and I took them. He is distinguishing between honest graft and dishonest graft. And here is what he has to say. Everybody is talking these days about Tammany men growing rich on graft, but nobody thinks of drawing the distinction between honest graft and dishonest graft. There's all the difference in the world between the two. Yes, many of our men have grown rich in politics. I have myself. I've made a big fortune out of the game, and I'm getting richer every day. But I've not gone in for dishonest graft. Blackmailing, gamblers, saloon keepers, disorderly people, etc. And neither has any of the men who have made big fortunes in politics. There's an honest graft, and I'm an example of how it works. I might sum up the whole thing by saying, I seen my opportunities and I took them. Just let me explain my examples. My party's in power in the city, and it's going to undertake a lot of public improvements. Well, I'm tipped off, say, that they're going to lay out a new park at a certain place. I see my opportunity and I take it. I go to that place and I buy up all the land I can in the neighborhood. Then the board of this or that makes its plan public, and there's a rush to get my land, which nobody cared particular for before. Ain't it perfectly honest to charge a good price and make a profit on my investment and foresight? Of course it is. Well, that's honest graft. I'll skip a little bit here and up in the watershed I made some money too. I bought up several bits of land there some years ago and made a pretty good guess that they would be bought up for water purposes later by the city. Somehow I always guessed about right. And shouldn't I enjoy the profit of my foresight? It was rather amusing when the condemnation commissioners came along and found piece after piece of the land in the name of George Plunkett of the 15th Assembly District, New York City. They wondered how I knew just what to buy. The answer is, I seen my opportunity and I took it. I told you how I get rich by honest graft. Now let me tell you that most politicians who are accused of robbing the city get rich the same way. They didn't steal $1 from the city treasury. They just seen their opportunities and took them. Now in conclusion, I want to say that I don't own a dishonest dollar. If my worst enemy was given the job of writing my epitaph when I'm gone, he couldn't do more than write, George W. Plunkett, he seen his opportunities and he took them. The mantra. Now here's another famous essay. The Curse of Civil Service Reform. Remember a few minutes ago I described the patronage system where the political machine acquired a lot of influence by making sure that their supporters had jobs. Well, there was a reform movement that resulted in Tammany Hall being disbanded and outlawed and many of their leaders put in jail. But the civil service law deprived Plunkett of the opportunity, and so we'll hear what his thoughts are now in a discourse called The Curse of Civil Service Reform. This civil service law is the biggest fraud of the age. There can't be no real patriotism while it lasts. How are you going to interest our young men in their country if you have no offices to give them when they work for their party? Just look at things in this city today. There are 10,000 good offices, but we can't get at more than a few hundred of them. How are we going to provide for the thousands of men who work for the Tammany ticket? Yeah. It can't be done. These men were full of patriotism a short time ago. They expected to be serving their city, but when we tell them that we can't place them, do you think their patriotism is going to last? Not much. They say, what's the use of working for your country anyhow? There's nothing in the game. And what can they do? I don't know. But I'll tell you what I do know. I know more than one young man in the past years who worked for the ticket and was just overflowing with patriotism. But when he was knocked out by the civil service humbug, he got to hate his country and became an anarchist. This ain't no exaggeration. I have good reason for saying that most of the anarchists in the city today are men who ran up against civil service examinations. Isn't it enough to make a man sour on his country when he wants to serve and won't be allowed unless he answers a lot of fool questions about the number of cubic inches of water in the Atlantic and the quality of sand in the Sahara Desert. There was once a bright young man in my district who tackled one of these examinations. The next I heard of him, he had settled down in Herr Morton's saloon, smoking and drinking beer and talking socialism all day long. Is it all fake that this government of the people, by the people, and for the people? If it isn't a fake, then why isn't the people's voice obeyed and Tammany men put in all the offices? When the people elected Tammany, they knew just what they were doing. They didn't put up any false pretenses. We don't go in for humbug civil service and all that rot. We stood as we have always stood, for rewarding the men that won the victory. They call that the spoils system. All right, Tammany is for the spoils system. And when we go in, we fire every anti-Tammany man from office that can be fired under the law. It's an elastic sort of law, and you can bet it will be stretched to the limit. First, this great and glorious country was built up by political parties. Second, parties can't hold together if their workers can't get the offices when they win. Third, if the parties go to pieces, the government they've built up must go to pieces too. Fourth, then there will be H blank blank blank, that's how he wrote it, to pay. Could anything be clearer than that? As to my second proposition, you can't deny that either. When parties can't get offices, they'll bust. They ain't far from the busting point now, with things, with the civil service business keeping most of the good things from them. How are you going to keep up patriotism if this thing goes on? You can't do it. Let me tell you that patriotism has been dying out fast for the last 20 years. Before then, when a party won, its workers got everything in sight. That was something to make a man patriotic. Now when a party wins and its men come forward and ask for their rewards, the reply is, nothing doing unless you can answer a list of questions about Egyptian mummies and how many years it will take for a bird to wear out a mass of iron as big as the earth by stepping on it once a century. Sad indeed is the change that has come over the young men, even in my district, where I try to keep up the fire of patriotism by getting a lot of jobs for my constituents. Whether Tammany is in or out, the boys and men don't get excited anymore when they see a United States flag, no more, or they don't care more for firecrackers on the 4th of July. And why should they? What's in it for them? They know that no matter how hard they work for their country in a campaign, the jobs will go to fellows who can tell about the mummies and the birds stepping on the iron. Are you surprised then that the young men of the country are beginning to look coldly on the flag and don't care to put up a nickel for firecrackers? And the third, ingratitude in politics. The politicians, there's no crime so mean as ingratitude in politics, but every great statesman from the beginning of the world has been up against it. Caesar had his Brutus, that king of Shakespeare's, Leary, I think you call him, had his own daughters go back on him. The rest of this chapter is mostly talking about his personal grudge against his own personal Brutus, so I'll skip over that and go on to his conclusions. The politicians who make a lasting success in politics are the men who are always loyal to their friends, even up to the gate of state prison if necessary. When the voters elect a man leader, they make a sort of contract with him. They say, although it ain't written out, we put you here to look out for our interests. You want to see that this district gets all the jobs that's coming to it. Be faithful to us and we'll be faithful to you. His followers are bound in honor to uphold him, just as they're bound to uphold the Constitution of the United States. But if he only looks after his own interests or shows no talent for sending out jobs or ain't got the nerve to demand and get his share of the good things that are going, his followers may be absolved from their allegiance, and they may up and swat him without being put down as political ingrates. Okay, looking back now, this is an unfamiliar philosophy of politics, right? Or are old things new again? George Washington Plunkett, and here is what, there's an afterword to this book, written by a man named Philip Freeman, who is, now this was published in 2015. He is or was the Orlando F. Qualley Professor of Classical Languages at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. Earned his PhD from Harvard University and is the author and editor of more than 15 books, including How to Win an Election, an Ancient Guide for Modern Politicians. He could probably answer questions about Egyptian mummies. He has this to say as an afterword. Is there any honest passion left in politics? It seems as if every word a politician says nowadays is carefully prepared and vetted through focus groups and paid consultants. On those rare occasions when presidents or senators let down their guard and speak from their hearts, whole cadres of aides are ready to spin their words and explain why the bosses didn't really say anything of the sort. Stick to the script, keep to the message of the day, hold another photo op, no questions, please. Which is why it is such a joy to read Plunkett of Tammany Hall. I must confess that I don't like George Washington Plunkett. I think most of what he did during his political career was self-serving and downright criminal. If I had been in New York City at the beginning of the 20th century, I would have cheered to see him stripped of his ill-gotten gains and locked away in prison for the rest of his life. This was written before a certain person came down a golden escalator in a tower in New York City. But it has been said of our current president that his candor is refreshing. I don't, it's all lies, so I don't know. I don't know what's so refreshing about it, but it certainly isn't the spin cycle stuff we were used to hearing in political speeches. It was definitely a change of pace. It's the fact that Plunkett confesses his deeds so openly and argues that they were all fine things to do that sets him apart from the corruption of modern politicians. Today there are very few members of the U.S. Congress who do not make a handsome profit from their office. Only the most foolish will take outright bribes, but many will fill their bank accounts with lucrative speaking fees from the giant businesses they are supposed to regulate, and if someone outspends them in the next election and spoils their fun, they can always cash in on their defeat by becoming a Washington lobbyist or serving on corporate boards. If a reporter manages to pin them down and ask if such actions are dishonest, they will reply with great indignation that they would never dream of profiting from their political connections. You can almost hear Plunkett snort with contempt. I seen my opportunities and I took them. There's also a real patriotism in Plunkett, though he uses the word differently from the way we might. For him, born dirt poor in an Irish neighborhood in the slums of New York, a patriot is someone with the freedom to rise up from the streets and make a difference in government. Sure, you could line your pockets with honest graft along the way when you can, but being an American means that the aristocracy who held sway back in the old country, or the wealthy lords of Wall Street, can't keep a man of talent and ambition down. Time and again, he rails against the civil service system as an impediment for worthy young men who want to be a useful part of government. For him, the exam is a wall built by the elite to keep out hardworking men who couldn't afford to go to Harvard but have the brains and drive to solve real problems. And here is what I consider a real contrast between the honest versus dishonest graft and what is the political climate in our country today. Plunkett also has a genuine ethic of service to the poor and downtrodden. It's painfully lacking among politicians today. If you heard a fire engine rushing through his district in any hour of the day or night, he was there at the scene with his men before the hoses were unrolled. He didn't ask if the poor family burned out of their home was a Tammany supporter or not. He cut through all the red tape and got them new quarters, clothes, and the means to rebuild their lives. Who can tell how many votes one of these fires bring me, he asks. Plenty, to be sure, since serving the needs of the poor and good politics go hand in hand in Plunkett's world. But at least he was there lending a hand, helping his constituents in their time of need, both from political expediency and a genuine connection to their lives. How many of today's politicians can say the same? And that, my friends, is the philosophy of George Washington Plunkett, with a few little asides, compare and contrast. Anybody have any questions or comments?
I grew up in Chicago, and Dick Daley is well known, I think, to all of you. I personally, as a youngster, was told bad graft, Daley was a bad guy, and but by the time I got to be a person in graduate school, I really did appreciate Daley. He was a fine person to be mayor of Chicago and did a great deal for the city.
I think that's right. Yeah, Don, it's not all bad and it's not all good.
What you drove home to me in the presentation was that almost equating of political patronage and patriotism. And I think that very much that's maybe what we're seeing today, that some of the support for the present regime is patronage, but it is perceived by those who commit it as being patriotism.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's what he thinks patriotism is, but it's also the only avenue of upward mobility for a lot of people who were born extremely poor or arrived in this country extremely poor. There's not an awful lot of upward mobility today, or patriotism. except the billionaires who are the most patriotic of all.
Certainly, Emperor Trump was born into wealth, and he got his start because his overindulgent father gifted him $1 million to get started, and later on, when he'd blown all of that, gave him millions more to keep him from suffering anything from the bankruptcies he caused.
How many times has he declared bankruptcy? 7?
4, some say 6. No.
Okay,
What was Tammany Hall's undoing, and who were his oppositions besides moralistic people?
yeah, good question. There was a governor of New York called Theodore Roosevelt who had something to do with it. And he was also, you might want to look up the cartoons of Thomas Nast, who skewered him with lots of caricatures that made him look like a gigantic, fat, bloated, it wasn't orange. Because newspapers were black and white then.
You stated that there's no upward mobility today, and I'm wondering when today started, because I think most of us in this room probably achieved more both educationally and financially than our parents did. You think that's disappeared? That people nowadays no longer have the opportunity to rise above their upbringing?
Yes, I think it's far more difficult today. The immediate post-war period, remember that there was the GI Bill that sent lots of young men to college who could not otherwise have afforded it, like my father. And it was also a period of enormous prosperity.
Well, I guess the way I look at that is that, yes, there was a GI Bill, but if you look at what's happened in education over the last 25 years, the opportunities have been given for people who are members of minority groups, women. If you look at the elite private colleges, you find that the majority or a large number of students in those elite private colleges are in fact coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. So I guess today with the Trump administration may be different, but I think if you look back 5 or 10 years, you really see that there have been incredible opportunities for disadvantaged people.
I don't disagree with you, but yet income inequality has been increasing. It's not that there's no upward mobility, it's just...
That's a different issue.
One of the factors of inequality right now is a change in the tax structure. When I was downsizing 2 years ago, I found my tax statement in the tax tables from 1968, when the marginal rate was 61%, down from 90 plus that it was during the Eisenhower administration.
Yeah.
And that is a big factor, plus the way that things have changed so that so-called unearned income is taxed lower than it used to be in the way of dividends and so on.
And all over the country, housing costs have made housing unaffordable unless you're really stinking rich.
I want to tell a personal story.
Okay.
And I'm really worried about the civil servants right now. My first husband was born in 27, okay, and he was 9 years older than I was, but he was born into a family of 7 children. His father died when John was 10 years old. Okay, think about this, in those years. And the military. He joined the military right out of high school. And when he came back, he went to college. The government helped him with the college. When he finished, he went into, Social Security. It was just Social Security then. And I'm just trying to remember. Anyway, we were married in 1954. And we bought our first house for $6,500 in Boise, Idaho. It was everything completely furnished, even a vacuum cleaner. And 2 years later, I was having a baby. We bought a brand new house. I remember he's a civil servant. And 3-bedroom, 2 baths, whatever. And it was $10,500. Okay, so now watch how we got started. Thanks for VA loans. Thank you for all of that. But the point I'm making is the things that Trump is trying to make the civil servants look lazy and sitting around, what did you do last week? My marriage was broken up because my husband worked so hard. I mean, literally, he would bring home books like this of laws and spend all his time reading these damn things. So anyway, the years go by, and John retired as a, he is the he's dead now, Regional Commissioner of Health and Human Services here in Seattle. Just pictures on the wall in this building, whatever, the federal building. But the point that I'm making is he went from 0 to the top of his, and Martha McSteen, who was the secretary of, just a minute, I think it was Reagan. Anyway, he wouldn't let her have the secretary job. He always called her the deputy, or whatever it is, the interim person. He would never give her the job, and 3 times he called her to the White House and said, "We want a young, male, Republican Party worker in your job, and we would like to have you as his deputy." And every time Martha answered, "Gentlemen," she's from Texas, from Dallas, Austin, she said, "Gentlemen, it's been many years since I've been a deputy," and she wouldn't give in, and he never did put her out of the job. But what I'm saying is some of these people have worked so hard all of their lives to do what they do, and they don't sit around. My husband wouldn't let me get involved in politics at all. I couldn't even put up a sign. So they take it seriously. I'm sure that's not everyone, but still, please stand up for these civil servants.
You're right.
They make it work.
You're right. Al.
Yeah, just a peripheral comment. The chief of the Forest Service, for which I used to work, just resigned in protest. Apparently seeing 25% cuts. And I was watching a Republican congressman being interviewed, and he said fraud, waste, abuse over and over, as if, yeah, that's well documented.
Yeah, I think they would find it just like they might find election fraud if they go looking.
They went looking and they never found it.
Anybody else?
In California, at least in the 1970s, a congressional seat was always a step down from a Senate seat, a state Senate seat. But the senators and the congressmen all knew each other.
Yeah.
Most of the state senators and most of the congressmen were not wealthy. Now, this was before Citizens United. I think things changed, And Jimmy Carter nailed it when he said, we became an oligarchy when Citizens United passed. But I think the author of the book that you read from, who said that find me politicians who aren't wealthy, congressmen who aren't wealthy, was mistaken, at least for the period before Citizens United. A lot of them were not wealthy.
Do you think it's the same or different now?
Different.
Behind you.
Doris?
A trivia. What's the tiger for in the Tammany pictures?
Oh, the title of the book?
No, the tiger.
Oh,
The tiger, the animal.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Tiger, Tammany Tiger. That was sort of a mascot
Okay.
for Tammany.
No explanation, just the
Yeah.
mascot. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why. I think they just decided it was an attractive.
I thought maybe it had a personality that matched Tammany, that's
Yeah.
all. You know, aggressive.
Yeah,
Thank you.
will eat you. Does anyone else have a question?
Thanks. I would always consider Tammany Hall kind of New York City actions and problems, but he went to the state Senate, it sounded like. Was Tammany Hall and his philosophy of really more than New York City? Was it the whole state, or what did it affect?
Well, these are Plunkett's individual observations that were collected by this reporter. I'm not sure that Tammany had anything I don't even know if parties had platforms then.
I just didn't know if it was far-flung or just...
Yeah.
I'll look it up.
Well, thank you. Oh, okay. Wow. Rita wants to say something. I want to hear her.
I just wanted to ask the question, so what do we do now? And I ask that each of us really look at, maybe take a piece of paper and come up with a to-do list. What can each of us do now, individually, and what can we do collectively? Now is the time, not just for talk, but for action.
I agree. In fact, I started to feel weird about this presentation. It's a little bit lighthearted, a little bit snarky, sarcastic, and maybe the tone of it was wrong and felt wrong after I watched what happened in the Oval Office yesterday, which made me, sick to my stomach.
I called Zelensky's office this morning and apologized for the American people and to put up with that president, and told him he was a hero of this epic. So if you can call, that's something. I try to do something positive. So
Distribute the phone number.
it just came to mind. I haven't had a chance, I will. Yeah, okay.
Those of you who know American history, has there ever been any other incident of a U.S. president doing anything so despicable in public? I can't. No, I'm not an American history expert.
If there's any American politician in 20th century that is a bigger counter to this fellow you've been talking about, I think it's Harry Truman.
Ah, yeah. Harry Truman.
He was a politician.
He was, yes. And he was thrust into office abruptly and then won an election, right? Yeah. When Roosevelt died?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. He also came from humble, if not poverty, at least,
And Truman had to make what, in my opinion, is one of the most momentous decisions in world history to
Yeah,
use the atomic bomb to
That's
end
right.
World War II.
yeah.
Perhaps no action has had a greater impact on the world than that decision. My opinion.
Well, it's a plausible opinion. Anybody else? Thank you again. Thank you again.